Hello and welcome to China Tonight. I'm Stan Grant. On the program, could one of the country's biggest property developers be allowed to fail? How China's ban on private tutors is forcing change in education. And what Winnie the Pooh and Tiananmen have in common. But first tonight, submarines and the AUKUS alliance. The announcement made late last week of a new trilateral security partnership between the Australian, American and British governments has ricocheted around the world. While China wasn't mentioned by the three leaders, the subtext was clear. Joining me now is Yvonne Yong. And Yvonne, while Australia has long insisted it doesn't have to choose between Beijing and Washington, with this alliance, that thinking seems to be gone.
Well, Stan, it has been described as Australia's most significant change of defence and strategic direction in decades, with Prime Minister Scott Morrison announcing a joint venture with the US and the UK to make the Navy's next submarine fleet nuclear-powered.
A forever partnership that will enable Australia to protect our national security interests, to keep Australians safe.
While details of the proposal are thin, we don't know how much it will cost, for example, or where and when the subs will be built. The political message was clear. The move is about countering China's posturing in the Indo-Pacific.
The relatively benign security environment that Australia has enjoyed over many decades in our region is behind us.
So, Yvonne, how has this been received in China?
Unsurprisingly, Stan, not well, with officials saying the move is extremely irresponsible.
美国、英国与澳大利亚开展核潜艇合作，严重破坏地区和平稳定，加剧军备竞赛，损害国际核不扩散努力。
Meanwhile, China's state tabloid, The Global Times, published a series of editorials about the announcement. In one, it warned Australia could now become cannon fodder in the event of a military showdown in the region. In another, it said America wants to make Australia an example of a faithful lapdog. China's embassy in Washington responded too, saying countries shouldn't build exclusionary blocks and that Australia and the US need to shake off their Cold War mentality.
Well, interestingly, while China isn't happy, Indonesia expressed concern, and it actually appears France is the country most upset by the decision.
Well, betrayal was the theme here, Stan, with a $90 billion contract to build Australia's next submarine fleet now officially in shreds. The French ambassadors to Washington and Canberra have been recalled, and French leaders say they've been stabbed in the back.
Il y a eu mensonge, il y a eu duplicité, il y a eu rupture majeure de confiance, il y a eu mépris. Donc ça ne va pas entre nous, ça ne va pas du tout. Ça veut dire qu'il y a crise.
And France has said it's not just the broken deal that has it rattled, but the diverging plans between Europe and America in how to manage China's rise. France has said it's now reconsidering its Indo-Pacific strategy.
Thanks, Yvonne. So what has America and its allies so spooked? In 2017, Xi set a new goal, a world-class military by the end of 2049. It already boasts the largest standing ground force in the world and the third largest air force. With more than 350 ships and 66 submarines, the world's biggest navy. But the focus in recent years has been modernising space, artificial intelligence, and in the case of its submarines, upgrading to nuclear power. It's estimated China will have rolled out 10 more subs by 2030, well ahead of the Australian plans. China argues it is about defence. But its aggressive moves into the South China Sea, an incredibly busy international waterway contested by China and its 5 neighbours, and its threats to reunify Taiwan by force have created the most likely flashpoints.
While we seek a constructive, results-oriented relationship with the PRC, we will remain clear-eyed in our view of Beijing's efforts to undermine the established international order.
Victor Gao is the Vice President of the Centre for China and Globalisation and Chair Professor of Soochow University in China. He was also once a translator for the former Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping. He joins me now from Beijing. It's nice to have you with us. I wanted to first of all just get your view on how you saw this submarine announcement.
Well, first of all, up to this point, Australia is part of the nuclear-free South Pacific. And I think this is actually a great value to the people in Australia. Now, armed with nuclear submarine to be produced locally in Australia, unfortunately, Australia and the Australians will lose that privileged status, meaning armed with nuclear submarine, Australia itself will be a target for possible nuclear attacks in the future.
Can I just stop you there? Can I just stop you there, Victor? Australia will be a target for nuclear attack from whom?
You do not need to know whom it will be, but as a logic, no one wants to target any nuclear-free zone, which now includes Australia.
Australia has said it will not be carrying nuclear weapons. These are nuclear-powered submarines, as indeed China has. But we're not talking about nuclear weapons. So how is it a target?
I would say the watershed moment will be if Australia is armed with nuclear submarines to be locally produced in Australia, Australia will lose that privilege of not being targeted with nuclear weapons by other countries. And that should be the wake-up call for the Australians, the 23 million Australians. Do you really want to be a target in a possible nuclear war, or you want to be free from nuclear menace going forward?
It is extraordinary, isn't it, that you're talking about nuclear war and attacks on Australia. Now, do you believe what you're saying echoes what the Chinese government believes as well, that Australia is a target?
Anything you do will have a consequence. This is the most profound consequence. And Australia and the United States and United Kingdom are being accused of violating the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is a gross violation of international law, and it will again have consequences.
You mentioned the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Australia says it will not be carrying nuclear weapons, and it is working with the International Atomic Energy Agency after this announcement. But I want to go to that threat. It is extraordinary, again, to hear someone say that Australia is a target. Are you saying that Australia will be targeted by China? Because when you talk about nuclear war, are you envisaging a conflict where China attacks Australia? And are you warning that Australia now is under threat?
Listen to me. I have been as straightforward and as simple as I can. That is, Australia right now is part of the non-nuclear South Pacific region.
But I don't think you are being straightforward, because I'm asking you, is that China who is making the threat? Are we under direct threat of attack now from China? That's the question I'm asking you. From whom would we be attacked?
You need to do your own math. You need to use your own brain. You need to do your own basic research. And my point is very clear. Australia, by going nuclear, will lose the privilege of not being targeted with nuclear warheads going forward.
Victor Gao, why would Australia not look for a closer relationship with the United States? Why would it not look to the possibility of nuclear-powered submarines when it sees China already with nuclear-powered submarines, increasing that capacity, making threats directly about invading Taiwan, which could have consequences for a broader conflict in the region, militarising and claiming the islands of the South China Sea? Is the provocation, is the aggression not coming from China's side?
First of all, a couple of points. You mentioned several very important points. One is that anyone in the world should know that there is a blood treaty between the United States and Australia. Meaning, if the United States fire any single shot, you, the Australians, will have no choice but to fight together with the United States, with whatever enemy you choose. In Afghanistan, in Korea, for example, in Iraq, wherever the Americans find themselves in the war, the Australians are on the American side, as if the Australians do not have any brain power left, as if you only have your muscles to fight with the Americans. That's the first point. Now, you talked about Taiwan. Taiwan is part of China. All the international organizations acknowledge that. The US government, ever since 1971, acknowledged there is only one China. You are talking about invasion, which is completely wrong. the
I'm
unification.
not talking about
China's
invasion,
states
Victor Gao.
with
Xi
Taiwan will
Jinping,
happen.
Xi Jinping, sir, has said he reserves the right to use force to reunify Taiwan. He is the one talking about an invasion of Taiwan, is he not?
Absolutely. Listen to me. The unification of China's mainland with China's Taiwan will happen by peaceful means preferably, and by non-peaceful means if it is necessary. No country will be able to deprive China's mission of national reunification. It's not invasion. It is the reunification of China's mainland with Taiwan. If the Australian government wants to stand in the way of that, be my guest. You will see what will be the consequences to Australia.
Listening to your language today, it did not take 30 seconds for you to talk about war, to talk about nuclear war, to make threats that Australia would be directly attacked in the event of a conflict. For anyone listening to this right now, why would people not be concerned that we are in a trajectory to conflict in this region?
No, I think you need to ask who pulled the trigger. Allow me, look at how mad the French people and the French government are now against Australia. They've recalled their ambassador from your country. They've recalled the their ambassador to the United States. Why? Why so much anxiety and excitement in France? By losing your status as part of the non-nuclear zone in the South Pacific, you lose your right and privilege of not being targeted with nuclear warheads going forward. As simple as that. For anything the Australian government chooses to do, there will be consequences.
Victor Gao, that's all we've got time for. Again, I appreciate you giving us your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
So while the submarine deal was making big news on official channels, what was being said on platforms such as Weibo and WeChat? The hashtag America is giving nuclear sub-tech to Australia had more than 1 million clicks, while some focused on who will be getting rich from the deal. This one summed up the sentiment of many. It can be seen that Australians bet America will win over China and believe if China wins over America, it won't be beneficial for Australia. So no matter what, they can't let China win. It's as simple as that.
But Yvonne, it was the fortunes of Evergrande that was making news on social media?
Yes, Dan, China's biggest property developer is wrestling with a liquidity crisis as it teeters between a messy meltdown, a managed collapse or a government bailout. The news has sent jitters through China's stock market and online. This Weibo post from the Global Times editor Hu Jijin was viewed over 400 million times. Will Evergrande survive? Many views are pessimistic. Time will tell. So who is to blame? Well, this netizen thinks the government is, saying it's not the market that drives property prices, but the government. This is a Chinese characteristic. Others expressed concern for buyers, with one saying, what about millions of owners? Will the house that costs a lifetime of savings never be completed? If the company collapses, it could have wide-ranging impacts on China's property market. And in what could be a major blow for China's Me Too movement, a Beijing court has thrown out a landmark sexual harassment case brought against one of the country's most famous TV hosts. In a series of social media posts in 2018, 28-year-old Zhou Xiaoxuan accused television personality Xu Jun of groping and forcibly kissing her in 2014 when she was an intern working at state broadcaster CCTV. Now, he denied the allegations, but the case helped to ignite China's Me Too movement. But much of the discussion about this case on social media platforms has been censored. One netizen wrote on a now deleted post on the platform Douban, I hope you can repost as much as possible. It's a good thing, even if just reposting as a protest against Sina's, Weibo's parent company, censorship mechanism. While another deleted comment said many accounts were suspended on Weibo, she's still keeping going. She's a very brave and powerful girl. Voices are completely silenced on Weibo. So Stan, in this instance, Me Too deemed too sensitive in China.
Yeah, and this is one of the more obvious ways in which the Chinese government controls its people. The Great Firewall is a technological barrier to parts of the internet the state fears. Nowhere is that more obvious than on social media. Angarad Yo takes a look.
In recent years, the Chinese government has gone to some pretty extensive lengths to shield its people from something truly terrifying.
Silly old bear.
Yeah, I'm not kidding. Since about 2017, images, drawings and videos of the cartoon Winnie the Pooh have been banned. But while honeypots may rest easy, there's something a bit more serious going on behind the scenes. We'll get back to this guy in a sec. It's no secret that China doesn't shy away from a bit of censorship, whether it be music, Hollywood blockbusters, or even live TV. So it comes as no surprise that social media too has come under the intense scrutiny of the CCP. It's known as the Great Firewall, a whole set of measures put in place that affect the information that's accessible within China, as well as how freely people in the country can communicate with others abroad.
A user who tries to access Facebook.com will oftentimes receive just a blank page or very limited information. With regards to local social media sites like Weibo or WeChat or other types of platforms like that, what Chinese users get is access to the full site, but the content that's actually on there that they're able to read and access and share is at times quite restricted.
Permanent internet access arrived in China in 1994, and it soon became pretty clear to the government the impact it could have, mostly people disagreeing with them. In 1997, the first laws were put in place criminalizing use of the internet to harm national security. And by the end of the decade, the father of the Great Firewall, a computer scientist by the name of Fang Bingsing, was doing work that allowed the government to block IP addresses and domain names, as well as look at the online data popping in and out of the country.
So when Xi Jinping came into power, certainly there was quite a bit of hope that there would be an opening up of the internet, because she was seen as someone who was more of a technocrat in many ways. But unfortunately, what we've seen actually is a tightening of some of the information that is able to be shared, posted, and circulated across the Chinese internet.
One study from a group of US and Canadian universities last year monitored some 534 million domains and found the Great Firewall blocks around 311,000 of them. Some big names blocked include Google, YouTube, Facebook, Reddit, Netflix, Instagram, Twitch, WhatsApp, Pornhub, and even Pinterest. Much to the absolute devastation of Chinese brides just trying to plan the perfect cottagecore wedding. And when you can access social media like Weibo or WeChat, there are a bunch of things you can't talk about.
Like the Tiananmen Square incident from 1989, Uyghur protests from the early 2000s, pushes for independence by Taiwan and Hong Kong. Other related things include drugs, homosexuality, other issues that they consider as unhealthy to society, like, say, for instance, now the latest thing is playing video games too much.
In early June, censors even removed any trace of the candle or birthday cake emojis from Weibo, as they're often used to commemorate the Tiananmen Square massacre. But where there's a will, there's an internet-savvy way. Memes. But even these usually come with varied, often brief success. When this pic of Xi Jinping hit the web, many notice it bared a striking resemblance to the pantsless Disney character, and his opponents began using it as a parody.
Oh yes, I'm rumbly in my tumbly.
Not finding the comparison flattering, government censors quickly stepped in and blocked the images. And in 2018, even banned the release of a new movie based on the character.
What to do indeed. Who? Christopher Robin. No.
Coded language is certainly one way of doing it, but of course, the problem is the more common it is, then the more likely the censors and other folks who are restricting your content are going to glean onto that and then, in turn, restrict that.
Sometimes, though, there's even a gap in that Great Firewall, like in the case of Clubhouse, an invite-only audio chat app. People can gather for online discussions with no filters or restrictions, and the audio isn't even recorded. For a few brief days in early 2021, thousands of Chinese citizens were able to discuss normally restricted issues openly, things like Taiwan, Hong Kong, and the treatment of Uyghurs. But that didn't last for long, and the app disappeared.
It's a game of cat and mouse. Censors scramble to keep control just as quickly as new ways around the restrictions are found. And for now at least, there's no end in sight.
Radio joins me now. It is a game of cat and mouse indeed, isn't it? How effective is this sort of censorship?
Well, they usually call this kind of censorship fear-based, which essentially means you're instilling a fear of repercussions in people to stop them trying to get around the censorship. But the problem with that is that if people are feeling a little bit fearless, maybe they will try to get around it. And it's also really open to what they call the Streisand effect, which is named after an incident within which Barbra Streisand was trying to suppress photos of her house, and in doing so drew a lot more attention to it. So the same kind of thing happened in this Winnie the Pooh incident. By trying to suppress it, more people probably went and looked at it. In essence, it backfired.
Winnie the Pooh and Barbra Streisand in the one story. Who would have thought it? Is the government now trying to change tack?
Yeah, so there are now, a lot more effective ways of instilling censorship that actually conceal from the person that's having this enacted on them that it's even happening. And we see a lot of social medias do this, they call it shadow banning. And because people don't like to be censored, by hiding the fact that it's happening, it actually just allows it to happen more easily. So two really popular methods are called friction and flooding. Friction is essentially where you make it just even a little bit more difficult to access that kind of content. It can be a web page that loads slower, or it can be, the thing coming up lower down on search results. And that, because internet users want everything to be immediate, it's actually really effective in stopping people from accessing things. The other way is flooding, which is essentially just putting a lot more information out there that you are okay with, and it makes it harder to find the things that you aren't.
Angarad, thank you. It's no secret that Chinese people value education. It's a common focus both in China and for the diaspora around the world. But in recent years, the pressure to succeed from kindy to college has been enormous, and it's fed a billion-dollar industry in tutoring. Until recently, when the government decided to pull the pin on private tutors, sending the industry into a tailspin. Annie Louis reports.
In June this year, a record-breaking 10.78 million students in China took the Gaokao, China's national college entrance exams. The exams are cutthroat. Many families only have one child, so they're banking on their kids to help them create a better life. And there's a lot of pressure. Preparation for the Gaokao begins months, years, and even decades in advance.
We have to take exams almost every day. In the daily exam, we are called 小测, which means quiz. And then we have tests every week. It's called 周测 in Chinese, which means weekly exam. And then we have 月考, which means monthly examination.
But none of these smaller exams count for anything. They're merely practice for the big exam.
Only the 高考 counts, and the others are nothing.
Li Zijun completed his entrance exams in 2020 and is now studying an accounting degree at the Guangdong University of Foreign Studies.
In China today, your diploma of university has been attached with huge importance. It's often related to your social status and your future salary.
As a result, it's extremely common for parents to send their children to tutoring outside of school hours in order to get ahead.
One parent does it, and the other needs to follow, because If you don't do that, it looks like you will be falling behind.
Until recently, the tutoring industry in China was worth $140 billion. But in July, everything changed and shares in tutoring companies started plummeting. New rules state tutoring companies are no longer allowed to teach core subjects. They can't operate on weekends, public holidays and school holidays. They must now be not-for-profit organisations, plus foreign investment and curriculums are banned. It's all part of the Chinese government's plan to decrease pressure on students, but there's already doubt about whether or not it will be successful in making students happier and healthier.
The situation is still very competitive because the only criterion for admission is still Gaokao. If they don't change the current institution, this ban would have no meaning at all, I do think.
It's very difficult to say what will happen, but it may well be that it's part of a larger set of reorientation policies that the Chinese Communist Party is now encouraging that includes things like overwork.
There's also the question of whether the government will be able to stop loopholes.
The situation of a ban of similar character in Korea in the 1980s, I believe, might be an instructive comparison because that just produced a black market.
Many parents and then now tend to hire one-to-one tutor and invite this tutor come to their home and close the door and to do this tutoring service.
In Australia, my own parents let me attend tutoring from grade 2 onwards. They didn't force me though, I was just a massive nerd who couldn't get enough at school. But it was an easy extracurricular activity for them to accept, since the importance of education is deeply ingrained in Chinese culture. Hey, you got that one wrong. It's 72.
Nowadays, I heard that many people are starting taking tutoring for their toddlers. There is an old saying goes that from toddler to tutors. It's quite funny, quite ridiculous, but it's true.
But once you do get to university, everything's sweet, right? Right?
When I was young, our parents have been telling us that once you get to the university, it will be all right. Nobody will attach more pressure on you. But the fact is, once I was in the university, I feel the pressure from the society directly. I would have to struggle for a better job by improving my GPA, by attending many competitions, or even prepare for the postgraduate entrance examination.
Annie Louie joins me now. Annie, I know you said you were a bit of a nerd and it was all about tutoring. Was there time for anything else at all?
I found that when I grew up and got into high school, there was a huge amount of pressure, not just from my parents to do well academically, but also from myself and my other peers to have other things on my plate like sports. We love our sports in this country, and also music. So I think we should suspend judgment when it comes to students in China wanting to do extra classes, because I reckon Chinese Australian students here also have their hands pretty full.
Indeed. I understand as well that some of the students in China were given new textbooks recently.
That's right, Stan. They were given textbooks that also related to Xi Jinping thought. So they just went back to school this month and saw that their textbooks had been revamped, full of ideologies to bring socialism into the modern era. And you may have noticed that in 2017, we had a speech that went for 3.5 hours by the president, where he unveiled these 14 principles of this particular thought. And it involves a lot of different political ideas, including having absolute party control over the military and promoting the ideal communist state.
They love numbers, Chinese leaders. Now, it's also, I've got something here on my desk. Mooncake.
Yes, happy Mooncake Festival, or Zhongqiujia. So this is the Mid-Autumn Festival where we worship the moon, and a lot of Chinese families will be getting together over their 3-day-long holiday. And so enjoy that mooncake.
Well, it's as heavy as a brick. So if I take more than one bite, I'll be running for the next week to work it off.
Yeah, apparently it's got as many calories as a Big Mac. So,
okay. I'll pass.
You know, everything in moderation.
And that's all we have on this week's show. Next week, we take a look at the courting of countries in the Pacific, and Wenlei Ma takes a look at how soap operas reflect real life in China. I'm Stan Grant. Have a great night.